We we do focus a lot on homeschooling because that's where a lot of our community, I should say, well, not membership, but our community audience is based. So for many families, they might be making the transition either from a traditional learning environment to maybe now a homeschooling environment for, you know, whatever reasons. And then there may be families who have been, their children have been homeschooled for several years, maybe even since birth. And maybe this school year, they are going into a traditional school setting. What are some things that you can highlight for the homeschooling community in terms of making that transition, whichever one it is, so that it's, you know, as smooth as possible for the children and the parents as well?
Yeah, and the parents, because that's a huge transition. Number one, acknowledging that it's a big transition. And with big transitions, take time for adjustment and like being gracious to yourself and your child and giving them the opportunity to adjust. And I think there's usually a reason why this switch is happening, whether it be from traditional learning into a homeschool setting or vice versa. And a lot of times parents and caregivers will make the decision and not really share the why with their child. I always say this: when you don't provide an explanation for why something is occurring, children are going to make up their own story about it. Because they need to understand it in some way, shape, or form. So if they're not getting it from you, they're gonna pull on whatever they're seeing in the environment and make up a story about it. It may be right, they may be right on with it, or they may be completely off. They may be like, well, we're not doing homeschooling anymore because my mom doesn't want me in the house anymore, when in reality it's because the family has a new opportunity that won't allow for the kids to be home. There's so many different. So kids can go into new environments and struggle significantly because of whatever story they have made up about like why they're there. And sometimes just having that explanation is enough to ease anxiety, to make it known to the child that there's an open communication about like what's happening. So I would start with explaining to your child why this situation is occurring. And the way you explain that to your 5-year-old may be very different than the way you explain it to like your 15-year-old or your high schooler. Take into consideration their developmental level, how cognitively, how they respond to things, like how they can engage in conversations, but don't take it for granted that you can just make this decision and expect your child to just like roll with the punches, no questions asked, because you said so. That's a hard transition. And as humans, I like to take the child adolescent part about it. As humans, we function best when we're able to understand what's going on.
Right.
So explain to your child what's happening, and then talk about like the expectations. So the expectations in those learning environments are different in lots of different ways. There may be general expectations around like doing your best, being respectful to the community of people around you. Like those are some general expectations, but there are probably differences in expectations around like how schoolwork is done, how you talk to your classmates, how you address the adults around you, so many different things. And so talk about the change is in expectations. If your child is going into like a traditional learning environment, talk to your child about, okay, like this is the school, these may be their rules, these may be your teacher's rules, like try to explain things to them as clear as possible, and vice versa. If they're coming into a homeschool environment, things are going to operate a little bit differently this year, and these are the ways which they are going to do it. As much of that front load conversation that you can have without just expecting your child to just go with the flow. I love your example about HR. The HR doesn't just say like, hey, welcome, figure it out. They say, hey, welcome. This place may be a little bit different than your last work environment because we use this system. or this is when we have our meetings. This is what time you're supposed to get to work. It may have been different than last year at your old place of employment. Like, we want to prepare our children and not put the burden. Sometimes we put a burden on kids when we just expect them to just go with it and not respect the fact that, just like us, they need that structure and that guidance and conversation around like what it is that's actually occurring.
Wow.
Wow.
Yes. Love all of that. So, and what I'm hearing is that lots of conversation and definitely, hopefully, we would hope that it's a discussion that the family has had before, the decision is made, and sadly sometimes it doesn't always happen, but that's something I definitely encourage.
Yes,
our home. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, and that conversation doesn't always happen, and I will tell you, I do work with some families where that becomes a very, especially the older the child or adolescent gets and they're feeling left out of decision making for themselves, that can become a very big source of family conflict, whether the child expresses that internal conflict or not, but it can become something that starts to cause a lot of back and forth within families. So have the conversation ideally before you've made the decision.
All right. Yes. All right. Love that.